Welcome, everyone, to Embracing Radical Change, where you are invited to join with us in global conversations with 25 cutting-edge experts and thought leaders who will guide you to connect with the truth in your heart, to unlearn the illusions of our modern world, and to activate bold new perspectives about the future of humanity. I am your host for this event, Jocelyn Mercado, and today I am very excited to welcome Robert Romanyshyn. Welcome, Robert. Thank you so much for being a part of the event.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, and let me go ahead and read your bio for those who may not know you already. Robert D. Romanyshyn is a teacher, writer, and psychotherapist. Author of 7 books, including a book of poems, he has also published numerous articles in psychology, philosophy, education, and poetry journals, written a one-act play about Frankenstein, and produced a DVD, Antarctica: Inner Journeys in the Outer World. In addition to online seminars and interviews, he has given lectures and workshops at universities and professional societies in the US, Europe, Australia, South Africa, Canada, and New Zealand. An emeritus professor of clinical psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute, he is an affiliate member of the Interregional Society of Jungian Analysts and a fellow of the Dallas Institute of Humanities and Culture. He has recently completed the Frankenstein Prophecies, Victor Frankenstein, the Monster, and the Shadows of Technology in the Modern World. And his website is www.robertromanyshyn.com. And if you scroll down below this video interview, you'll be able to click right through to his website. And also, Robert has just mentioned to me as we were getting started here, that if you visit his website and sign up to receive notifications, about his book, The Frankenstein Prophecies, then you'll receive word about when it comes out, when it's available, etc. So we welcome you to go ahead and do that. So Robert, I am very excited to speak with you about your topic today, which is edges and margins, living and working in exile. And so this is very, very intriguing, particularly the subtitle. Can you tell us what you mean then by the term exile?
Yes. I guess the term is rooted in a question that actually has been with me for a long time and has only sharply increased. And that question is, how have we gotten not only so distant from nature, but also so destructive in our relationship to nature? And I say that that's been with me for a long time because when I look back, I think I felt that even as early as when I was a young boy, but I won't go into all of those stories. But certainly by the time that I got to college, and it was a dream that led me into changing my major from pre-med to psychology. So, you talk about the dream. So there was something that knew more than I knew consciously, something that was coming from the dream side of the psyche. And I paid attention to that. And where that led me was to understand that with Freud and Jung's work at the beginning of the 20th century and up until today, especially Freud and Jung and everything that has followed from them, the unconscious has become an image for that holding place in the individual psyche and in the collective psyche for how we have become estranged from ourselves, from nature, and from a sense of the sacred. So exile for me means that sense of not feeling at home, that there's something, it's a kind of uneasiness that has increasingly become more deeply felt, I think, in our culture, particularly in the last 50 years. And I thought I would find an answer to this question in psychology. And so that's what I did. And I've been working as a psychologist, living and working as a psychologist Um, Not separating my life from my work. I think I tell my graduate students that all the time, that psychology is not just a job, it's a vocation. You're called into it. So to be a psychologist is also to live psychologically in the world, you know? And that's something that really matters to me. So hoping that I would find an answer to this sense of estrangement that we feel. My training, background education led to what I would call a cultural historical approach to looking at psychological life. And that means I try to dig into the phrase that you used, the illusions of our contemporary world. I try to really remember origins to see what we have forgotten in terms of how those origins live on today unconsciously for us. And one example of that was the book I wrote on technology in 1989, Technology, a Symptom and Dream, which now the Frankenstein Prophecies is a retelling of that story, but in more dramatic form. So it has been that approach to psychology, that interest in history and mythology, and the poets. I mean, the poets have been my constant companions, and particularly a poet like Rainer Maria Rilke, who says somewhere in the Duino Elegies, I forget which number, but this fits with the theme about exile. He says, "We are not so securely at home in our overly interpreted world." Now, he wrote that at the beginning of the 20th century. So the poets, the visionary poets, I would say, not all poets, but the visionary poets, like Rilke, and certain parts of psychology are looking at the same issue. So that's my answer to the first question about exile.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. That's quite fascinating to think of us as in exile from our natural place in the world, our place as a part of nature and part of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Just rings so true, and it really, it makes me think that well, it makes me think of something you said in an interview earlier this year, actually, that if we're feeling depressed, if we're feeling anxious, that's a sign of sanity right now.
That's right. Depression is the canary in the coal mine. I mean, I don't want to take that too far, because I think if you stay with your depression, what you find is that something in your life psychologically is being ignored. So the other side, if you can treat the symptom as a call to remember something you've forgotten and you work with your depression, it's amazing. You find flowers blooming in your soul. You find geysers of joy springing up in your psyche. So I value symptoms as a call to remember something we have forgotten. And what we do as a culture when we medicate it away is we just keep killing the soul because we'd rather not know what we're exiling in ourselves. So
yeah, it takes the courage to go there and do that work of looking.
It does, yeah.
So getting back to your topic here, how is exile related to the edges and the margins?
Yeah, I tend to speak more in the passive voice because if you live psychologically, things come to you like questions and images and ideas or even thoughts and like dreams or symptoms or falling in love. It happens. You don't actively seek these out. You are thought by your thoughts, for example. So edges and margins became images, holding places like alchemical vessels for what I mean by exile. And it's there in the dedication. I got some notes, so periodically, I can't keep all of this in my head at 75. It's in the dedication that I wrote to my new book, The Frankenstein Prophecies, which, by the way, I've worked on for 20 years. So I'm not a good example of doing things quickly. The work wants what it wants. So this was the dedication as I worked on this, and it's about images and margins. The book is dedicated to all those who have been exiled to the margins, whose voices have been silenced, and whose stories are still untold. That's what I'm trying to do in the book, is to go to the margins and release all of that energy, all of those stories, all of those voices. And we see that happening culturally. This, to me, is the helpful sign. Look at all of the things that are erupting from the margins, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, but not particularly, but also the young people protesting gun violence. You know, the old order is breaking down, and we have to attend and assist like a midwife and helping birth all of that is coming up now. So to me, then, these images of margins, there was something else. No, it'll come up later. This is where I try to do my work in terms of what I write, what I think about, what I talk about, and how I try to live. You know, to pay attention, you know, even in an ordinary way, when you're walking on the street and you see somebody with a sign saying that they're homeless. Well, that's us. That's a mirror, because at some psychological level, in being estranged from nature, we are homeless too. And if we just pass them by and make them invisible, we are contributing to the ongoing homelessness in the psyche, in the collective cultural psyche. And it's not just kind of giving money, and I'm not trying to preach here, but it's being able to stay and look in the mirror and let it reflect back to you an inconvenient truth, to borrow a phrase from Al Gore.
Yeah, that's
so I hope that helps.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Very powerful image there with the, yes, we are homeless in this.
Well, you know, I'd add one other thing, maybe as a good example. Well, two other things about these images. Again, the poets, William Butler Yeats, shortly after World War I ended, he writes The Second Coming, and he says, "Things fall apart, the center will not hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The best lack all conviction, and the worst are filled with passionate intensity." And then at the end he says, "And so what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem, waiting to be born." I mean, you read that slowly out loud, and you get a sense, well, the rough beast today is everything. It's that monstrous storm in the Carolinas. It's the wildfires. It's the increasing heat. It's all of that destruction. That's the rough beast now. And he was saying that almost 100 years ago. And then I'll give one other example. In the Frankenstein prophecies, I try and do a dramatic way. So I draw on my experience of living in the world. And there's one story when myself and my brother-in-law were walking in Soho one winter night last November. It was cold and we were bundled up, and the rest of my family, my sisters, my other brother-in-law, they were ahead of us. We turn a corner, and from this kind of alleyway, this voice comes and says, "What is happening? Can't you people see what is happening? What is the matter with all of you?" And I was stunned. It sounded like incantatory. I had to stop, and I turned. My brother and I walked up to her, and it was this old, black, almost blind woman. And she says, "I have no money for my medicine and my food and to feed my children and grandchildren. What's the matter with all you people?" That's an image, a living image of the margins. We're addressed by that. And I'm not making a judgment that I'm any better than any of the people who rushed by, wouldn't hear the voice. That's what we're doing. Frankenstein was a deaf man. He didn't listen to his monster. So we have to start being made a bit uncomfortable for the sake of the collective psyche and for the soul of the world. We're all homeless.
So how you mentioned monsters in that segment there. How has your work and your life in psychology been a response to exile and edges and monsters?
Well, I've taken lately, when I lecture, I'd say lately the last 10 years, to say that my life and work in psychology has been an ambivalent love affair. And that's really true. I thought when I had that dream many years ago that led me into psychology in college from pre-med, I thought I would find an answer to my own interior sense of feeling lost, feeling homeless. And I did and I didn't. But it's an important lesson, and that's why I say it's an ambivalent love affair, because every time you fall in love, there is an ambivalence involved. Because initially you are looking for the beloved to be everything that you are not able to be yourself. Your mother, your savior, your Don Juan, whatever the case may be. We load the other with all these projections. And what makes it ambivalent is that the beloved, if they have any kind of wherewithal in themselves, they're not going to satisfy that, you know? Oh, in fact, I think everybody should go out and see this new movie with Glenn Close and Jonathan Pryce called The Wife. It's about how many women who married to creative men sacrifice their own creativity and what happens with that. It's a powerful story. So you have to be disappointed in love. Love has to fail if you're going to individuate and find within your own psyche what you're asking the other to be for you. So that's what I mean in saying psychology has been both, it has given me an answer and it has failed to give me an answer. How it has failed is that increasingly, I thought in the 60s when I was training that there was a new dawn in psychology. There was the existential phenomenological movement. There was the third force movement in psychology. Everybody who lived in the 60s knows what I'm talking about here because it was spreading in culture, listening to the music and the protests, etc. But progressively over the last 50 years, psychology itself, in its official guise or disguise, has become a STEM discipline. That means it is a discipline that is dedicated to understanding the human being and to even mandating what psychological education should be in undergraduate and graduate schools. It should be in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And anything about the humanities is not to have any place in psychology. That's from the APA, American Psychological Association. So it's getting worse. A lot of my good friends are really trying to really withstand against that, including myself. Because the image of what it means to be a person there is very reductive and materialistic. We equate explaining something with experiencing it. And we're going down that path in our technological culture. That's why my book is subtitled The Shadow of Technology in the Modern World. And it really details that in many, many ways, not just in psychology. In fact, psychology is in the background in that book. But let me return to the thing about explanation and experience. When you have a dream, like the dream that led me to psychology, or think about whatever dreams you've had, the neurological reductive approach, which I'm not saying is wrong, but it's not what the dream means. And explaining that dreams have something to do with brainwave patterns is to say that's all they are. But nobody lives that way. You wake up and you feel addressed by the dream. It has a meaning for you. So we're fast losing that sense of the difference between explaining something, and we are getting so good at explaining everything that we have forgotten how to experience anything. That's a problem with the STEM discipline. So all my life, I have been working against that, that way of increasingly forgetting the human person, both on the individual and the collective level that's operating in psychology. And it's, you know, it's interesting in a way because if you know that the myth of Prometheus, one of the Titans, he gets punished by the gods and he's chained to a rock. And my good friend Glenn Slater has pointed out that the value of that myth is where we are stuck, where our wounds stick us, that's where we have to do our work. And so here I am in the beginning trying to think about how we've been estranged to nature, and I enter psychology, and that's where I've been doing the work. That's where my wound is. That's the ambivalent love affair. It's like the wound that never heals, you know. It's my Grail myth living out. So I teach, I write on the margins, I do a therapy of cultural, historical origins, what Hillman calls a therapy of ideas, looking for what has been forgotten, ignored, left outside about the human person. And I've done that, for example, in the technology book, my Soul and Grief book, which added something else, which came right after the technology. It taught me something that I want to say this in a way that doesn't sound too pessimistic, but it's in our failures and in our wounds, in our losses, that we begin the journey of homecoming, or what Jung calls individuation. And the Soul and Grief recounts that terrible experience in my life when my first wife died suddenly. It's in the book on research, The Wounded Researcher, trying to bring the unconscious into the research process so that we simply don't project onto the work what we don't want to deal with in ourselves. It's in the poetry book, and it's in the DVD I did about Antarctica. It's in the Frankenstein prophecies. So that's where I'm doing the work. That's the field that I'm trying to cultivate. I guess I still believe, like I did in the 60s, that if you can change the way we understand ourselves psychologically, we can change the world. I love a phrase that Hillman says, he's won many battles, but he's lost the war. That's how I feel. Sometimes I feel like my whole life has been a mad Don Quixote quest tilting at windmills. But that's what you got to do. You do that. And you do it as best as you can. Because the point is, you're doing what you've been called to do. That's what you're in service to. And that's the key thing. I mean, I think the real question is, what are you in service to? What is larger than yourself? But particularly the poetry book is dedicated to the margins, because even all of the suggested sections are about paying attention and writing poetry to these things, that if you pay attention to the ordinary, you see what's extraordinary in it. If you pay attention to the mundane, you see the miracle in it. If you pay attention to what is given, you might see the shadows that are there. So I try to do that in a poetic way rather than in the other ways I write. And that's the other thing I say about a psychologist, being a psychologist. As a psychologist, I'm a failed poet. And people say to me, no, you write very poetically. I said, but you're not hearing what I'm saying. To be a poet is a blessing by the gods. So I would never call myself a poet, but I'd rather be a failed poet in psychology than a successful psychologist. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I can hear well, I wouldn't mention it, but I can hear some people saying, oh, you're getting too dramatic. But that's who I am.
Yeah,
I'm dramatic. I'm Irish and Ukrainian, and when I get going, I get really wound up. All right, enough. What do you want? What else?
well, yeah, I'm intrigued by something that you mentioned there, which was homecoming. So, this idea that we've been exploring, that, we're in exile, we're homeless, collectively and individually, right? Certainly collectively as humanity, and then each of us individually is really, so many people are going through really challenging, difficult times right now.
Yeah.
So I think we're really feeling that on an individual level as well.
Mm.
So if we want to come back home, then are we in the right place when we're in exile? Is this the right place to begin the homecoming?
A very nice way to put the question. You cannot come home unless you know that you are not at home. And you cannot know that you're not at home unless you feel in the midst of your circumstances that something is missing. And so where is the best place to have that sense of, well, maybe my life is comfortable. Maybe my life is this or that. But something just doesn't, it feels uneasy. So that's a little small moment of feeling exile. So exile is the only place to really start from. Or it's the place that is given to us where the journey of homecoming can begin. And then one of the ways immediately to experience homecoming out of exile is to think about selling your house. All right. That might be relevant for a lot of people out there because my wife and I are going through that right at this moment. And of course, you have to interview a realtor or many realtors, and they're just doing their job. Realtors, they tend to talk really fast. I'm not demeaning them, but they know things I don't know, market share and all of that. So we interviewed a lot of realtors, my wife and I. And then this one woman came. She walked in the house. She said, "This is a lovely home. And this is what you want to sell, a home, not a house." And we chose her because a home is not a house. Unfortunately, she got ill, quite ill, very soon, and she wasn't able to continue. So that's sad for her, for us. But the point that I want to take away from this is that when you start to sell a house, you realize that if you are living in your home and you see it just as a house, you're losing something. You're already in exile, but you don't know it. So what makes a house a home? Well, it's a place where you dwell. And it's a place that you feel you are grounded in the earth, beneath the sky or the stars, in community with others, and where it's a sheltering place for memories, including the ancestors. It's there in the things that surround you. The hardest thing for me to sell this home is if you walked into my study, which we can't do in digital space. I walk in, there's all around the place. There I am in 1955, hanging on the walls in a picture of Ebbets Field where the Dodgers played. It's suffused with memories. So when you begin to feel that things are just not quite right, that's the moment of exile, and that's where the journey can only begin. So can we love those moments of uneasiness? They're not, I mean, everything in our culture works against it. Just look at our drug commercials. You know, if you're unhappy, take this pill, and if that doesn't work, take a pill to even make that pill work more. So I look for those moments where something stops me in my tracks. I say, wow, this moment is bringing me back to something I've forgotten. And that happened to me many, many times in my life. One was at a cave in Peshmel in France. And it's one of those caves that go back anywhere from 12 to 20,000 years. And you descend into the darkness of the cave. I actually wrote a story about this. And it's dark, and you wonder, how did these people paint on these walls these incredible images? And we were walking out, and I was at the end of the line. And I saw this painting on the wall of a hand 10,000 or more years ago. And, you know, maybe not everybody feels that, but when you feel something like that, that stops you, you must pay attention. And what stopped me was here, over the span of millennia, somebody was still greeting me. And when I look at images of the digital hand today, and I'm not saying these advances in bioengineering, medical advances should not be done. They are great. If you've lost a hand, you have that. But to the degree that the whole transhumanist movement is saying that we can remake the whole body, Frankenstein's dream, and in the image of these mechanical devices, I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but we should know what we're leaving behind. I feel more connection with that 12,000-year-old hand than I do with one of these new digital hands. But I hope I'm clear. I'm not saying anything negative about that advancement. I'm just saying, let's not rush into it forgetting who we are. Then, of course, I think the DVD I made in 2009, when I was in the Antarctic with Veronica, that experience there changed my life. You could go to my website. There's a little clip. I don't have any more copies of the DVD available, sadly. But if anybody's interested in it and wants to write to me, just send it with that thing to my website and say, I'm interested, want an advance notice of the book, but I'd like a copy of the DVD. I can get some more made, and I would gladly send it to you. I think they cost about $15. But at this place, so far from home, in this frozen landscape of crystal cathedrals, I felt I was beginning the journey of homecoming. And that's what I say in the DVD. So there at the far end, Encounters at the End of the World is the title of Werner Herzog's film about the people who live and work there. So that was one. And then in the Frankenstein prophecy, there's another example of a moment where it's an ordinary moment, but it awakened me, and ordinary moments can awaken us to what we have lost. And if we have time, I'd like to read it. It's a short excerpt from the Frankenstein book. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So it's called An Epiphany of Wonder. Sitting in the garden of our house in Fangeau, a very small village in the Aude region of France, where I have come to write my book on Frankenstein, I am thinking how this landscape and the light remind me of the paintings that were done by the French Impressionists. Spellbound by the way in which nature displays itself in stillness and quiet repose, I wonder if nature herself is wondering if it should awaken this particular morning as I sit in my garden. In this quotidian, everyday event of the rising sun that we take for granted, each morning seems to me to be a kind of miracle. And I wonder, am I a figure in a painting dreaming I am sitting in a garden in Fanjeau, France? Am I a person sitting in a garden in Fanjeau, France, dreaming I am a figure in a painting? In this moment, the boundaries between mind and nature fade away as the I that I am seems to dissolve, as happened once before in the fields of Antarctic ice, and once before that in the hide in the bush of South Africa, as the sun rose and the animals appeared at the water hole, formed as if out of the morning mist. Before the word, before the thought, before the idea, there is the gesture of the pointing finger. In response to the opulence of the world's display, children do it all the time because they live in wonder. Even at a bug crawling on the ground, you can be taking a walk with your grandson, and a walk up the block can take an hour because they stop and point at everything, as Taria told me when I visited her in Asheville. It was so beautiful. Children do it all the time, and we, if we attend to this kind of moment, we understand that the pointing figure sketches out a path toward and into wonder. In this place then, in Fanjeau, in the garden, and in this moment, thinking becomes a matter of dreaming with your eyes wide shut. It's an oxymoron, deliberately. So as I give my arm and hand over to the world, I follow the arc of my finger toward the vast field of undulating hills that roll on toward the Black Mountains, the name of the mountains where we are. The hills are terraced and dotted with patches of brown earth, oasis of green trees, nearby hilltop villages, and a constant play of light and shadows as the sun wanders, stretching and spreading itself out almost shamelessly on the land. The Black Mountains themselves appear as a great high wave that has been building up as the hills roll toward it, and at its height, it is just about to break upon the land. Is that a play of tides, an erotic dance to the music of creation between the field and the mountains? In the distance, I can hear the music of a braying donkey that now and then sounds far away. Is it a cry of melancholy that this beauty of the natural world awakens? Is that why I hear it in the way that I do? I don't know. It's not the explanation that matters. What I do know is that we share in some unknown way, this donkey and I, a bond of kinship as creatures that belong together to the earth. Is it in this great surround of nature that somehow his donkey world and mine come together? The air as it glides through the trees tempts my nose with smells of summer fruit and caresses my skin with a touch of cool, a touch as cool as blue water. The aroma of lavender rides the wind, and I can hear the buzzing of bees as they go about their work that is a major mainstay of our food supply. The sensual flesh of my body vibrates in this erotic coupling with the sensuous flesh of the world. In this moment, the world is holy, and I suspect that our first response to the world is always a kind of prayer. In these moments, time moves slowly, and in relative silence, it becomes a doorway into the timeless sacred. There is a hint of eternity cradled in moments of silence. So that actually that's exactly where Veronica is now. And she sent me a picture, and I said, oh my God, I have to read this. I would just like to add to this that my grandson's mother, Amanda Nietzsche, she's a yoga master, and she does things with a lot of kids, trying to awaken them to the Pachamama, which is a Peruvian word for earth. And she just sent me a short story that she wrote that is beautiful and very much not just for children, but for the child in us to be awakened. She should be interviewed in your thing because she is opening up some really important doors.
So thank you so much for sharing that about just looking to the mundane, but seeing the magic, the wonder that is there. And I love what you said about the little children. I have a daughter who's 4 and she's going to be 5 soon, but she's that way. It will take us, if I let it go at her pace, it would take us 2 hours to do the little loop around our neighborhood, because she just loves every little flower, every little insect, every single thing. So beautiful. But yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And your writing is just amazing, just really wonderful. Well, so my next question to you then is, how can we practice this? What suggestions do you have for those listening? How can we practice homecoming in our own lives and even in our work? And you, hold on a second, you need to unmute.
My video. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really important to translate thought, thinking, ideas into practice. So I've been giving a lot of thought to that in the last few years. And what I can offer, what I can suggest is what has worked for me. Everybody, I think, has to find their own way. So if this helps, great. If it doesn't, then mute me. Find your own way. First of all, what I have found to be important is I try as best as I can. I don't always succeed. It's not about being perfect. It's about staying as close to what calls you as you can. So I try to start my day every morning in a ritual way, living in ritual space. I have a little altar with pictures of the ancestors and little things that I have that they had made. And I sit in my rocking chair and I play the harmonica, because for me, the doorway to open for the ancestors is not to think in my head, but to move, to play music. And what I particularly like about the ancestors is they don't mind how badly I play. It doesn't seem to matter when you get to the other side. And I just play, and I let whatever images of them come to me, or whatever images come. And I try to end with a ritual prayer, asking them to help me do as little harm as possible this day. Because we know we're going to do harm. We're going to have the inconsiderate remark or whatever, but to try and do as little of that as possible. And the second thing I do is, in addition to that ritual space, I try to remember what lies behind whatever we see in an ordinary event. What shadows are there? What miracles are there? What we just talked about. And also, sometimes you're doing something and a parent will come into your consciousness, like your dad or your mother or your grandmother or somebody who has passed on. I never treat that as something that is happening in here. I treat that as a visitation. And if I can, and hopefully I try as much as I can to do that, I will stop for a moment and say, why are you here? What do you want? What do we have to say to each other? So it's allowing them to be alive again, but in their own way, in their own subtle presence. I can't do that all the time. If that happens while I'm driving a car, I just have to say, you have to wait until. The third thing is to practice hospitality as much as I can. There's an old myth from Ovid that talks about hospitality, where these two disguised gods go wandering, and they cannot find anyone who recognizes them or gives them hospitality in the village until they get to the house of this oldest couple, Philemon and Baucis. I won't go into the whole story. You can see it. It's in some of my writings. They welcome these two strangers, and because of their generosity and hospitality, the gods drop their disguises, and Philemon and Baucis, they don't become gods or goddesses, but they become eternal. But the important thing about the myth for us is that they pay attention, and there is a miracle in the mundane, something extraordinary in the ordinary. So that's what hospitality does. It slows you down, and you can see what you might pass by. A fourth thing is like the story about the garden in Fanjot. I think it's really important for each of us to cultivate an aesthetic sensibility. And our educational system is killing that. Teach for the test. Kids have to learn how to live their wonder through the imagination, through movement and art and song and dance and painting. We have to cultivate this kind of aesthetic sense which awakens the bond between our body and the world. And we live in a culture that is anesthetic. We want to numb ourselves because there's just too much anxiety floating. But the way out of the anxiety is not to become more and more drugged. The way out of the anxiety, like depression, is to say who is in there and find what makes you uneasy and try and then find those little moments, like the wonderful thing that you said about is it your daughter at 4?
Yes.
It happened with my grandson when we met in New Orleans. He went for a walk with me, and I wound up, because he sees things and he says, Grandpa, I want that. When I got back to the house, I looked like a walking tree. I had palms and twigs and things on my head because he wanted all of these treasures. He was awake to them. And I couldn't say to him, no, I can't take this. So an aesthetic sensibility. And the word aesthetic in its root means to hear, to be addressed. Doesn't mean beauty. That's not its first meaning. And finally, the fifth, to me, a paramount thing about practicing homecoming is to pay attention to your dreams. Tend to your dreams, because the wisdom of the dream is deeper than the wisdom of our ego-conscious mind. And I'm not about interpreting dreams. I don't believe in interpreting dreams anymore. I work with dreams in a much different way. I see dreams as offering us the possibility of possibility. And I go with the mood of the dream, which expresses a wish. So if I dream about being a lion, or not me being a lion, but there's a lion in my dream, I would start by saying, I relax, I breathe. I would say, if I were a lion, how would I be today? See, if I were is a different kind of mood. It's not a fact. It's not an idea. It's a wish. And so someday for your group, I'd love to do a whole series on working with dreams in this way. So attending to the dream, living in ritual space, remembering the ancestors, practicing hospitality, cultivating an aesthetic sensibility. And I guess to that, I would add, really enjoy life. Despite everybody has problems and troubles, but there's something magical and miracle about living in this wonderful world on this sacred earth, beneath the stars, part of the cosmos. How could you not feel expansive when that recognition comes? So for what it's worth, that's what I try and do.
Thank you. Thank you. One of my, that made me think of something that one of my elder teachers, Woman Stands Shining. I don't know if you've seen her in these interviews before, but she says that it is such an honor to be brought here in a physical body. That there are many beings on the other side who have never experienced being able to live in this physical way that we do. And it is such an honor to be here, and we are given a bounty of blessings and magic to enjoy. So that really puts a whole different spin on things than what we normally think.
Yeah.
Thank you for those practices.
And I think that, Jocelyn, that's what you are doing with these. This one has a different title than the one we did before.
Yeah, this
This
is
one,
embracing radical change.
Embracing Radical Change. See, I think what you're doing is really just so important. So good on you to be doing that. Yeah. And you have to be an inspiration. It has to be in the atmosphere between you and your children. I'm sure they're soaking it up.
We have fun. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yes, yes. And it's the same thing that you do through your books and your teachings and your writings. You know, it's
Yeah,
we're feeling this call. We're,
yeah,
we're on our mission.
yeah. It's fun. I write because it's fun. Well, I write too. I have to live. Writing for me is as important as having my toast and coffee in the morning. In that order, toast and coffee first, writing second.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you for being a part of this. It's
Yeah,
really been a very rich, wonderful conversation.
thank you.
So I know that you are offering a free gift to everyone who's listening, and it's the article that you've written, "The Melting Polar Ice."
Mhm.
And so was this inspired by your trip to Antarctica? Is that where it stemmed from, or was it a different time?
It stems from that, but it also stems from uh, my book, Technology as Symptom and Dream,
Okay.
25 years later, after I had been to the Antarctic, and in response to a very powerful critic who doesn't like my work at all. He can go unnamed, that's fine. And so I felt called to respond to him. And so it's based on that journey, which updates from that experience, the book I wrote on technology 25 years earlier.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you for offering this. And so, for everyone who would like to read Robert's article, "The Melting Polar Ice," and experience that wisdom, you can go. So, just below this recording, where you're watching this video, if you scroll down, you'll see a link to Robert's website. And so, from there, we recommend first sign up to receive notifications about his book, "The Frankenstein Prophecies." And from there, you can navigate to publications, which is I believe it's publications of multimedia, which is in the navigation at the top. And then you can find the PDF for the Melting Polar Ice article. And you can download that from there. So hope everybody will go over and check that out and download that article. Yeah. Well, thank you again, Robert, for being a part of this Embracing Radical Change event. It's always an honor to speak with you. Thank you so much.
You are most welcome. And again, my thanks to you for all that you're doing. Have a good day.
You too. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.